Congratulations on your new position. We'll miss having such a dedicated team player around here. That was the sarcastic goodbye text from my former boss, Damian, after I quit Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. My name's Kai, I'm 31 years old, and for 3 years I'd been working 70-hour weeks without seeing a single penny of overtime pay. I thought walking away would finally give me my life back. Instead, I discovered something that would change everything. My new company was about to steal Pinnacle's biggest client, and there wasn't a damn thing Damian could do to stop it. It started on a Thursday evening in Portland when I was supposed to be heading home, but found myself still at my desk at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, watching the clock tick past 9 p.m. Again, the office was nearly empty except for the cleaning crew and me, hunched over campaign analytics for our biggest account, Nexus Technologies, a Fortune 500 software company that brought in $12 million annually for our small agency. I'd been Nexus's dedicated account strategist for 2.5 years. Every late-night crisis, every weekend emergency, every last-minute campaign pivot, that was me. While other strategists handled 8 to 10 smaller accounts, I carried the full weight of our most demanding client because I was the only one who understood their complex product ecosystem and quarterly launch schedules. Damian, our creative director turned self-appointed COO, loved reminding everyone that I was salary exempt. That meant no overtime pay, no comp time, just the expectation that I'd work whatever hours were necessary to keep Nexus happy. "We're not a clock-punching operation here, Kai," he'd say whenever I brought up the 60-hour weeks. "We're building something special." What we were building was Damian's ego and his corner office renovation fund. While I pulled all-nighters fixing campaigns that his poor planning had created, he took credit in client meetings and collected bonuses tied to account performance. I was 31 years old, burned out, and watching my personal life disappear one unpaid overtime hour at a time. But I had no idea that my resignation letter was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose just how much Pinnacle Marketing really depended on the salary-exempt employee they thought they could replace. I wasn't always the overworked martyr. When Pinnacle first hired me straight out of Reed College with a digital marketing degree, I was hungry and eager to prove myself. Lila Vasquez, the founder and CEO, interviewed me personally. She liked that I asked questions about client retention rates instead of just talking about my GPA. "We need people who think strategically," she'd said, "not just tactically." For the first year, everything was perfect. I handled mid-tier accounts, learned the business, worked normal 45-hour weeks. I was good at what I did, really good. My campaigns consistently outperformed industry benchmarks. Client satisfaction scores on my accounts averaged 9.2 out of 10. I had a natural ability to understand what made different audiences tick, whether it was B2B software buyers or consumer electronics enthusiasts. When Nexus Technologies came aboard as a client, Lila assigned them to me because of my tech background and proven track record. "This is our biggest opportunity," she'd explained. "Nexus could transform our agency from regional to national. I need my best strategist on this." Nexus was demanding from day one. Their CMO, Rachel Hendricks, was a perfectionist who'd worked at Google and Facebook. She expected agency-level thinking with Fortune 500 execution standards. Most agencies couldn't handle their pace. They'd burned through 3 marketing partners in 2 years before finding Pinnacle. But I thrived under pressure. Within 6 months, I'd increased their lead generation by 340% and reduced their cost per acquisition by 60%. Their quarterly product launches, which used to be chaotic scrambles, became precisely orchestrated campaigns that consistently hit revenue targets. Rachel started requesting me specifically for strategy calls and began referring other tech companies to Pinnacle, based solely on the work I was producing. The success was intoxicating, but it came with a price. As Nexus grew more dependent on my strategic insights, they demanded more of my time. Evening calls with their West Coast team became routine. Weekend campaign optimizations became expected. And Damian, who'd been promoted to COO 6 months after I landed the Nexus account, started treating my availability as unlimited. "Nexus loves you, Kai," he'd say, whenever I mentioned the growing workload. "Don't mess up a good thing." I thought being indispensable was job security. I had no idea it was actually a trap. Damian Courtwright wasn't always the office tyrant. When he first joined Pinnacle 2 years into my tenure, he seemed like the creative visionary we needed. He had a background in brand strategy from a mid-size agency in Seattle, an impressive portfolio, and the kind of confident presentation style that impressed clients in initial meetings. Lila brought him in as creative director because Pinnacle was growing fast and needed someone to standardize our creative processes. On paper, it made sense. In practice, Damian was more interested in empire building than creative excellence. Within 6 months of his arrival, Damian had convinced Lila to promote him to Chief Operating Officer. "We need someone managing day-to-day operations while you focus on business development," he'd argued. And Lila, who was brilliant at strategy but hated administrative tasks, agreed. That's when everything started changing. Damian introduced efficiency metrics that measured how many hours we logged on different accounts. He implemented mandatory weekly one-on-ones that were really just opportunities for him to micromanage our work. He started inserting himself into client relationships, particularly successful ones like Nexus. But Damian's biggest flaw was that he fundamentally misunderstood what made our agency successful. He thought it was our processes, our systems, our corporate structure. He didn't realize it was the individual relationships and expertise that people like me had built with clients over years of proving our worth. During Nexus strategy meetings, Damian would interrupt with buzzword-heavy suggestions that showed he didn't understand their business model. He'd propose synergistic cross-platform initiatives when what they needed was targeted LinkedIn campaigns for their enterprise sales team. Rachel Hendricks would politely acknowledge his ideas, then turn to me for actual strategic guidance. This dynamic drove Damian crazy. He started requiring that all client communication go through him first. He began taking credit for campaign successes in monthly reports to Lila. Most frustratingly, he started treating overtime as a personal commitment to the company rather than a labor issue. "We're not McDonald's, Kai," he'd say when I brought up compensation for the 70-hour weeks. "We're a creative agency. You can't punch a time clock on inspiration." What he really meant was, "I'm getting bonuses based on account performance, and I need you working for free to maintain my profit margins." The warning signs started small, like most workplace toxicity does. Damian began scheduling urgent client calls at 5:30 p.m. on Fridays, knowing full well they could wait until Monday. He implemented a policy requiring weekend email responses within 4 hours for our enterprise accounts. When I mentioned that this was affecting my work-life balance, he suggested I reassess my commitment to career growth. The overtime issue became a constant point of tension. Oregon state law was clear about overtime exemptions. They applied to employees earning above a certain threshold performing primarily executive, administrative, or professional duties. I was earning $68,000 annually, just above the exemption line, but my work was a 90% tactical execution, not strategic planning. I was essentially a highly paid campaign manager, not an executive. I researched the labor laws thoroughly and approached Damian with documentation. Based on the actual duties I'm performing, I explained, I should be classified as non-exempt and eligible for overtime pay. I showed him printouts of Department of Labor guidelines and examples of similar roles at other agencies. Damian's response was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. "Kai, I'm surprised you're thinking about this relationship in such transactional terms. We're offering you incredible experience with a Fortune 500 client. That's worth more than overtime pay." When I pressed the issue, he got more direct. "If you're not happy with the arrangement, maybe this isn't the right fit for you." Meanwhile, the workload kept increasing. Nexus launched a new product line that required separate campaign strategies for 3 different market segments. Their European expansion needed localized content for 6 countries. Their trade show presence required coordination across 12 industry events. All of this fell on my desk because I was the Nexus specialist. Other team members started avoiding the account. Serena, one of our junior strategists, told me privately, "I feel bad watching you burn out, but I'm not crazy enough to volunteer for that workload." Even Beatrice, our account director who normally fought for challenging projects, steered clear of anything Nexus-related. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal 3-week stretch in March. Nexus was launching their biggest product update in company history, timed to coincide with a major industry conference. I worked 23 consecutive days, including both weekends, managing everything from media buys to influencer partnerships to event logistics. When the launch exceeded all performance targets and generated $2.3 million in first-week sales, Damian sent a company-wide email taking credit for the strategic vision and flawless execution. My name appeared once in a list of team contributors between the graphic designer and the social media coordinator. That night, I calculated that I'd worked 312 hours that month for my regular $68,000 salary. It worked out to about $18 per hour for some of the most complex strategic work in our industry. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in late March when I walked into the office expecting praise for the Nexus product launch success, only to find a written warning on my desk. The subject line read, "Performance Improvement Plan, Attendance and Availability Issues." I read it 3 times before the absurdity sank in. According to Damian's documentation, I had failed to maintain consistent availability during business hours and showed resistance to feedback regarding work-life integration. The specific citations were laughable. Apparently leaving the office at 7 p.m. constituted early departure, and declining to attend a non-essential happy hour showed lack of team engagement. The timing was calculated cruelty. This PIP arrived exactly 48 hours after our biggest client success of the year, success that I had personally delivered through 3 weeks of unpaid overtime. Damian knew exactly what he was doing, creating a paper trail to justify firing me before I could escalate the overtime issue to Lila, or worse, to the Department of Labor. I walked straight to Damian's office with the document in hand. "This is retaliation," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You're documenting fake performance issues because I questioned the overtime classification." Damian leaned back in his chair with that smug expression I'd grown to hate. "Kai, this isn't about overtime. This is about attitude. You've been increasingly negative and resistant to feedback. The team has noticed." "What team? I work 70 hours a week. When do I have time to be negative around the team?" "See? Right there. That victim mentality. That's exactly what I'm talking about." He picked up a pen and made a note on a legal pad, as if he was documenting this conversation for my personnel file. "We need team players here, not people who count hours." I realized in that moment that Damian had never intended to address the overtime issue fairly. He'd been building a case to fire me from the moment I raised it, ensuring he could replace me with someone who wouldn't question the workload or compensation structure. That afternoon, I started writing my resignation letter. If Damian wanted to play hardball, I'd show him what happened when his indispensable employee actually left. I spent 2 hours crafting it, making sure the language was professional, but clear about my reasons for leaving. Effective 2 weeks from today, I am resigning from my position as Senior Account Strategist at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. After careful consideration of my career goals and the ongoing challenges regarding workload management and compensation structure, I have decided to pursue opportunities that better align with my professional values. I printed it out, walked to Damian's office, and placed it on his desk while he was on a phone call. He glanced at it, covered the receiver, and said, "We'll talk about this later." As if my resignation was just another agenda item for him to manage. 2 hours later, he sent that sarcastic text. "Congratulations on your new position. We'll miss having such a dedicated team player around here." He had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The first week after leaving Pinnacle, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I slept in past 7 a.m. No emergency client calls, no weekend campaign optimizations, no Damian breathing down my neck about availability issues. For the first time since taking on the Nexus account, I remembered what it felt like to have a weekend. But as the initial relief wore off, I started connecting dots that should have been obvious earlier. During my final weeks at Pinnacle, I'd noticed some odd patterns in Damian's behavior. He'd been asking unusually detailed questions about my Nexus workflows, requesting copies of campaign templates that were for training purposes, and insisting on sitting in on strategy calls where my presence wasn't typically required. I'd also overheard him on a phone call that seemed strange at the time. He was talking to someone about transition planning, and maintaining client confidence during personnel changes. When I'd asked about it, he'd brushed it off as general contingency planning. Now I realized Damian had been planning my departure for months. The performance improvement plan wasn't a response to my overtime complaints. It was the final step in a strategy to force me out while positioning himself to take over the Nexus relationship. The more I thought about it, the more I understood Damian's real motivation. As COO, his bonuses were tied to account profitability. My salary represented the single largest expense on the Nexus account. If he could maintain the client relationship with a cheaper junior strategist, or better yet, handle it himself, his profit margins would skyrocket. There was just one problem with Damian's plan. He fundamentally misunderstood what made the Nexus relationship work. He thought it was about processes and systems that could be easily transferred. He didn't realize it was built on personal trust, industry expertise, and 3 years of consistently exceeding expectations under pressure. A week into my unemployment, I got a LinkedIn message from Rachel Hendricks, Nexus's CMO. "Kai, I heard you left Pinnacle. I wanted to reach out personally because you've been such an important part of our marketing success. If you land somewhere new, I'd love to discuss potential opportunities to work together again." That message told me everything I needed to know. Rachel valued my personal contribution, not Pinnacle's brand or Damian's management. And if she was already thinking about working with me elsewhere, it meant she wasn't completely confident in Pinnacle's ability to maintain the same level of service without me. I started researching other agencies in Portland, particularly ones that specialized in B2B tech marketing. That's when I discovered Meridian Strategy Group, a boutique agency with an impressive client roster and a reputation for treating employees fairly. Their Glassdoor reviews mentioned competitive salaries, reasonable work-life balance, and most importantly, proper overtime compensation for non-exempt employees. I decided to reach out, not just because I needed a job, but because I was starting to see an opportunity for something much bigger than employment. While I was interviewing with Meridian Strategy Group, Damian was discovering what maintaining client confidence during personnel changes actually looked like in practice. According to Serena, who kept me updated through text messages, the Nexus relationship started unraveling within days of my departure. The first crisis came that Thursday when Nexus's European product launch campaign went live with incorrect pricing information for the German market. It was the kind of mistake I would have caught during my usual pre-launch review, but Damian had assigned the task to Connor, a junior coordinator who didn't understand the complexity of international campaign management. The error cost Nexus approximately $47,000 in advertising spend and damaged their credibility with key distributors in Munich. Rachel Hendricks sent a scathing email demanding an explanation and immediate corrective action. Damian's response, according to Serena, was to blame Connor for inadequate attention to detail, rather than acknowledging the systemic oversight failure. The second crisis came the following week when Nexus's quarterly board presentation needed supporting marketing analytics. I had always prepared these reports personally, synthesizing data from 6 different platforms into a coherent performance narrative. Damian assigned the task to Beatrice, but she didn't have access to my custom dashboards or understand the specific metrics that mattered to Nexus's leadership team. The result was a generic report that looked impressive but missed the key insights that Rachel typically used to justify marketing budget allocations to the board. For the first time in 2 years, Nexus's marketing presentation was questioned by board members, and Rachel had to admit she didn't have the detailed analysis they expected. But the real disaster came 3 weeks after my departure during Nexus's biggest product launch of the year. It was a campaign I'd been planning for 6 months before leaving, with intricate timing across multiple channels and precise budget allocations that required constant optimization. Damian decided to streamline my original strategy by consolidating several targeted campaigns into one broad reach approach. His reasoning was that it would be easier to manage with our current resources. What he didn't understand was that my original strategy was specifically designed around Nexus's diverse customer segments, each requiring different messaging and channel strategies. The consolidated campaign launched on a Monday. By Wednesday, the conversion rates were 60% below projections. By Friday, Rachel was demanding an emergency strategy meeting to understand why their most important product launch of the year was failing. Serena texted me after that meeting. "Kai, it was brutal." Rachel asked Damian direct questions about customer acquisition funnels and marketing attribution models. He kept deflecting with corporate speak. You could see her losing confidence in real time. That's when I knew Damian's plan was collapsing. He'd assumed the client relationship was just about account management and smooth communication. He didn't realize that Rachel valued strategic expertise above everything else, and that expertise couldn't be faked with PowerPoint presentations and buzzword-heavy explanations. The writing was on the wall, but Damian was too arrogant to see it. My interview with Meridian Strategy Group went better than expected. Helena Morrison, the founder and CEO, was impressed by my Nexus case studies and frustrated by stories of my overtime situation at Pinnacle. "We've built our reputation on treating talented people fairly," she said. "Burnout doesn't produce good work, and good work is all that matters in this industry." Meridian offered me a senior strategy director position with a $78,000 base salary, full overtime compensation for any work exceeding 45 hours per week, and most importantly, a performance bonus structure tied to client satisfaction rather than just revenue metrics. It was everything Pinnacle should have been. But Helena made an even more interesting offer during our second interview. "We've been trying to break into the enterprise tech space for 2 years," she explained. "We have the capability, but we lack the relationships and industry credibility. If you could help us land even one significant tech client, we'd consider expanding your role to include business development responsibilities." That's when I mentioned Rachel Hendricks and her LinkedIn message about working together again. Helena's eyes lit up immediately. "You're telling me you have a direct relationship with the CMO of a Fortune 500 tech company, and she's already expressed interest in working with you at a new agency?" I explained the Nexus situation carefully, their current dissatisfaction with Pinnacle, their complex marketing needs, and Rachel's growing frustration with the service quality decline. Helena listened intently, asking strategic questions about contract terms, budget allocations, and decision-making processes. "Here's what I'm thinking," Helena said. "We bring you on immediately, get you settled with some of our existing accounts to demonstrate our capabilities, and then in a few months we make a strategic pitch to Nexus, not as poaching, but as offering them the level of service they deserve." It was perfect. Not only would I escape the toxic environment at Pinnacle, but I'd have the opportunity to continue the work I'd built with Nexus under leadership that actually valued expertise and work-life balance. I accepted Meridian's offer that afternoon and started the following Monday. My first few weeks were revelatory, working with clients who appreciated strategic thinking, colleagues who collaborated instead of competed, and management that understood the difference between dedication and exploitation. But the real satisfaction came 6 weeks later, when Rachel Hendricks sent me another LinkedIn message. "Kai, we need to talk. Are you available for a confidential conversation about Nexus's marketing strategy needs?" During that call, Rachel was refreshingly direct. "Pinnacle isn't working out. The quality has dropped significantly since you left, and frankly, we're considering other options. Would Meridian be interested in discussing a potential partnership?" I scheduled a meeting between Rachel and Helena for the following week. As I prepared the presentation deck, I couldn't help but smile thinking about Damian's reaction when he found out that his easily replaceable employee was about to take his biggest client to a competitor. The irony was delicious. His plan to increase profitability by eliminating my salary was about to cost him $12 million in annual revenue. The Nexus presentation meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in late June at Meridian's downtown Portland office. Rachel Hendricks arrived with 2 colleagues, David Chen, Nexus's VP of Marketing Operations, and Sarah Kim, their Director of Digital Strategy. This wasn't a casual conversation. It was a formal agency evaluation. Helena had prepared meticulously. She presented Meridian's capabilities, showcased case studies from similar tech clients, and outlined a comprehensive strategy framework specifically tailored to Nexus's business model. But the real turning point came when I presented my analysis of Nexus's current marketing challenges and proposed solutions. I'd spent weeks preparing, not just rehashing my old strategies, but developing new approaches based on market changes and Nexus's evolving business priorities. The presentation included detailed customer journey mappings, attribution modeling recommendations, and a phased implementation plan that addressed every pain point Rachel had mentioned during our preliminary conversations. The difference in engagement was immediate. Rachel asked detailed follow-up questions, David took extensive notes, and Sarah requested copies of specific frameworks for internal review. These were the kinds of strategic discussions I'd thrived on at Pinnacle, but that had become impossible under Damian's management style. "This is exactly the level of thinking we need," Rachel said during the closing discussion. "Kai understands our business in ways that our current agency simply doesn't." Helena closed the meeting by proposing a pilot project, a 3-month engagement focused on Nexus's upcoming product launch, with performance metrics clearly defined and the option to expand into a full partnership if results met expectations. The proposed budget was $400,000 for the pilot phase, with potential for a $2.8 million annual contract if the partnership moved forward. Rachel agreed to present the proposal to her team and provide a decision within 2 weeks. As they left the office, she pulled me aside. "Kai, I want you to know that this decision isn't just about agency capabilities. It's about working with people who understand what we're trying to accomplish." 2 days later, the fallout at Pinnacle began in earnest. According to Serena, Damian received a call from David Chen requesting a meeting to discuss some concerns about account performance and future strategic direction. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, a time slot that every account manager recognizes as the corporate equivalent of being called to the principal's office. That Thursday, Lila Vasquez called me directly. "Kai, I heard through industry channels that you're at Meridian now. I'm calling because Nexus has requested a meeting about their account, and honestly, I'm worried about what that means." Her tone was completely different from the confident CEO who'd hired me 3 years earlier. She sounded stressed, uncertain, and for the first time, genuinely concerned about the business implications of my departure. "Lila, I left because of the overtime situation and Damian's management approach," I said carefully. "But I never intended to damage Pinnacle or create problems for you personally. I know, and I take responsibility for not addressing those issues when you raise them. But Kai, if we lose Nexus, it's going to impact everyone here. Is there any way we can work something out?" It was tempting to feel vindicated, but mostly I felt sad. Lila had built something good at Pinnacle, but she'd let Damian's ego and poor management destroy it from the inside. The call from Lila put me in an impossible position. I genuinely respected her as a leader and didn't want to see Pinnacle fail, but I also couldn't ignore the months of exploitation and toxic management that had driven me away. More importantly, I had professional obligations to Meridian and personal commitments to Rachel about providing the strategic support Nexus needed. I decided to be completely transparent with Helena about Lila's call and the ethical implications of the situation. "I don't want our success to be built on deliberately sabotaging my former employer," I explained. "But I also can't recommend that Nexus stay with an agency that can't serve their needs properly." Helena's response showed exactly why Meridian was the right place for me. "Kai, we're not poaching this client through underhanded tactics. We're offering superior service to a company that's dissatisfied with their current provider. That's called competition, and it's how the industry works." She was right, but I still felt a responsibility to handle the situation professionally. I called Lila back and proposed a compromise. If Damian can demonstrate that Pinnacle can provide the level of strategic support Nexus needs, and if you can address the management issues that created the situation, I won't actively encourage them to leave. But I also won't lie to Rachel about Meridian's capabilities or discourage her from making the best decision for her business. Lila agreed to those terms, which I knew meant she was planning to have a serious conversation with Damian about his performance and management approach. What I didn't expect was the desperate email I received from Damian himself the next day. "Kai, I think there's been some miscommunication about your departure and the circumstances around it. I'd like to schedule a call to clear the air and discuss potential collaboration opportunities between our agencies." The tone was completely different from his usual arrogance, conciliatory, almost pleading. For the first time since I'd known him, Damian sounded worried, but his timing was terrible. That same morning, Rachel called to inform me that Nexus had decided to move forward with the Meridian pilot project. "The strategic approach you presented was exactly what we've been missing," she said. "We're terminating our contract with Pinnacle effective at the end of this month." When I didn't respond to Damian's email within 24 hours, he escalated to calling me directly. "Kai, we need to talk. Nexus is making a mistake based on incomplete information. You know how much work we put into that relationship. Damian, they're making an informed decision based on service quality and strategic capability," I replied. "This isn't about personal relationships or office politics. It's about results. But you're actively working against us. You're using inside knowledge of our client to benefit a competitor. I'm using my professional expertise to serve a client who needs strategic marketing support. The same expertise you told me was replaceable when you forced me out." There was a long pause before Damian said, "What would it take to fix this situation?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for him, but then I remembered the performance improvement plan, the sarcastic farewell text, and the months of unpaid overtime that had funded his bonuses. "It's too late to fix this, Damian. You made a strategic decision when you decided I was expendable. Now you're learning what that decision actually cost." The Meridian Nexus pilot project exceeded every performance metric Rachel had established. Within 3 months, we'd increased their lead generation by 280%, reduced cost per acquisition by 45%, and delivered their most successful product launch in company history. The $400,000 pilot investment generated over $3.2 million in attributed revenue. More importantly, the working relationship was everything the Pinnacle partnership should have been. Strategy meetings focused on business objectives rather than ego management. Campaign optimizations happened proactively rather than reactively. And when Rachel needed weekend support for an urgent board presentation, she got it, with appropriate overtime compensation and comp time the following week. The full contract negotiation took place in October, 6 months after I joined Meridian. Nexus signed a 3-year, $8.5 million partnership agreement that included digital strategy, campaign management, marketing automation, and business development support. It was the largest contract in Meridian's history and positioned us as a serious player in the enterprise tech marketing space. Helena celebrated by promoting me to Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and giving me equity in the company. "This partnership doesn't just change our revenue," she said during the announcement. "It changes our entire trajectory as an agency." But the real satisfaction came from the industry ripple effects. Within 6 months of the Nexus partnership announcement, Meridian received inquiries from 4 other Fortune 500 tech companies, all of whom had heard about our work through industry networks. By the end of that year, we'd signed 2 additional enterprise clients and hired 8 new employees. Meanwhile, Pinnacle's downward spiral accelerated after losing the Nexus contract. According to Serena, who left for a better opportunity 4 months later, Damian was demoted back to creative director and took a 25% pay cut. Lila was forced to lay off 6 employees and scale back their office space. The agency that had once been Portland's rising star became a cautionary tale about the cost of poor management. The final piece of justice came unexpectedly. In December, I received a LinkedIn connection request from Connor, the junior coordinator who'd been blamed for the European campaign disaster. His message was simple. "Kai, I wanted to thank you for how you trained me and treated me when I was starting out. I learned more from working with you for 6 months than I did from anyone else in my first 2 years at Pinnacle." That message reminded me why I'd loved the work in the first place. Not just the strategic challenges or client relationships, but the opportunity to build something meaningful with people who shared the same professional values. Today, I work reasonable hours, earn fair compensation, and collaborate with colleagues who understand that sustainable success requires treating people with respect. When I stay late for a client emergency, it's because I choose to, not because someone's threatening my job security. And every time a new client mentions hearing about our work through word of mouth in the industry, I remembered Damian's parting text about missing a dedicated team player. He was right about one thing: dedication does matter in this industry. He just never understood the difference between dedication and exploitation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't personal. It's professional. It's proving that competence and character matter more than office politics and ego. It's building something better than what you left behind and showing everyone exactly what they lost when they chose to discard your contributions. The people who think you're replaceable usually learn the truth when you stop doing the work they took for granted. By then, it's too late to apologize, too late to negotiate, and too late to fix the strategic mistake they made when they confused loyalty with desperation. In the end, the market always rewards genuine value over manipulative management. And sometimes, if you're patient and professional, you get to watch that lesson play out in real